What's up, gamers? Back here with more leftovers. This is the desert cube we've been working on here on YouTube. I can only edit this cube while I am recording here. So I started off talking about how this is going to be a Mishra's Workshop, a Bazaar of Baghdad cube. I've talked about some of the support for dredge and for artifact stuff. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about interaction. Now that I've kind of established some of the stronger things going on, I'm going to talk a little bit about reactive elements, how we're going to push back on some of the strong graveyard and artifact stuff. So I have kind of a longer list here. So I have a lot of cards on my desk. I think I have over 300 cards on the stack here. I might even have more than 360, and I haven't accounted for basic lands, but I've kind of just been sorting them. This is stuff that kind of just came out of my collection. This existed in the box of the 5-row box. I allow myself to have a card of cards, and I was just kind of grabbing stuff that seemed cool, but for the purpose of these uploads, I've been sorting them. So I kind of just sorted out a lot of stuff that deals with being interactive. Kind of talk about this as a package just to kind of frame the videos here. So one thing is I obviously want a lot of artifact destruction, and I'm biasing slightly. Some of this is like color pie stuff. There's more artifact answers than enchantments. I want some stuff in the disenchant space, but artifacts are the higher priority to destroy because of Mishra's Workshop, and there's going to be some strong artifacts here. And green does get access to destroying enchantments, and there are going to be some powerful enchantments I've already talked about. Necropotence, Yawgmoth's Bargain. But there's also some stuff that I haven't gone over yet that being a green creature is actually upside. So even though green has access to enchantment destruction, I prioritize destroying artifacts a little bit higher. It's not that important to me that all of the green stuff that could destroy an artifact or enchantment can hit an enchantment. The artifacts are what matters more there. Also, starting with Uktabi Orangutan, this is one of the original enters the battlefield creatures from Visions. That's when they introduced doing that on Magic cards. And I've kind of talked about how I prioritize like using the old card frame. It's something that I think is very cool. Definitely works with the aesthetic of the leftovers. Certainly a lot of nostalgic notes being hit in this cube. Also, the orangutan, classic art. If you know, you know, and if you don't know, now you know. The orangutan's going to be a nice one here. Definitely just going to be main deckable, and I don't want to necessarily go for Reclamation Sage. Just some other cards I'm going to talk about that Reclamation Sage makes less appealing just by existing. And those other cards I think are way cooler. Or I just want them to have a home here, and Reclamation Sage would clash with them. And then red, of course, just gets shatters. So Plundering Barbarian is like an upgrade over Manic Vandal, which is just red Uktabi Orangutan. But then Plundering Barbarian has a modal ability. You can make a treasure if there's no artifact to destroy. And I think this is pretty inoffensive. I think making treasures is cool. I think in a desert, giving you a treasure as like some one-time mana ramp or mana fixing is kind of appealing. Having artifact destruction is good, and also Manic Vandal has a newer card frame anyway. If we were talking about like an old frame red shatter effect, I'd be into it. But the Plundering Barbarian, I like this design just better than Manic Vandal. A braid is just, I have a bunch of braids. This is going to be useful against aggressive decks, against artifact decks. Just a design that they have not outdone since they printed this. Card's coming up on 10 years old, and they've done more stuff in the space, but this one is really standing the test of time as far as red interaction, at least as far as for non-burn red decks go. Only being able to hit creatures, but a braid is still pretty appealing. Just a nice card to cube with. Bedevil. So this is another one from those Final Fantasy Commander decks. Kind of a lot of these just generic removal spells on those decks. I think this is originally from Guilds of Ravnica, which I don't really value that printing. It's not, that's too new. It's not really significant to me. But Bedevil, just a nice flexible card. Destroy an artifact, creature, or planeswalker. I haven't really gotten to the planeswalkers going to be in this queue, but there's going to be a couple. So having a card that can destroy planeswalkers over just having creature and or artifact removal is good to have around. And then some of the green cards, like Viridian Zealot, I picked this one up when I worked on the Time Capsule Cube, which I no longer have put together. Something I wrote about on Star City Games back when I was writing about Cube. This was just a really widely played card when it was standard legal from Dark Steel, a card that would have showed up in Cube quite a lot back at that time. It's clearly weaker than Reclamation Sage. So this is one of those cards where I still have this. I think it's rad. It's a significant part of the game's history. Like it speaks to me about a time and a place. When I was first getting into Magic, like Mirrodin block is the first block after Onslaught, and Onslaught's when I started playing. It's also the first block with the modern card frame. So you have the washed out mana symbol there too. That's kind of a sign of the times. See how the green in the text box is not flush. It's like grayscale relative to the green in the mana cost there. That is something that only lasted for 8th edition and mirrored in block. So kind of a fun part of the game's history there. Having to sacrifice this creature clearly makes it worse than an enter's ability that could destroy an artifact or an enchantment, but being a green creature is also, there's going to be some upside relative to being green and a creature at all, which we'll get to in another video. And a bigger one here, Indrix Stomp Howler. Just a sick card, was cubed a lot back in its time. 5 mana, 4/4 enter. This card's been functionally reprinted in Conclave Naturalists is the card name, but this is the original there. Having the full naturalize for 5 mana on a 4/4, this card's just sweet. Gonna give it a home here. And Knight of Autumn is another one where I'm definitely not doing Lauren of the Third Path. One of the cards on the first video was Caracas. I'm not trying to give you like looping disenchant effect on a body. But then if I'm going to have a mono green effect, like cards that are worse than Reclamation Sage, that actually lets Knight of Autumn shine. Like this is a card that when it first was printed, it read kind of exciting, but it's really just not exciting as a gold card. Like both green and white can kind of do everything that this card does. And if I kind of peel back the cards you have access to in this cube, then this can work more as a gold card, be a reason to go into green and white, which is also historically challenging color pair when it comes to curating cubes. Like, what is green white doing? I like the green white cards I've selected for this cube. This is the one that I had to work for a little. Like, I had to remove some stuff that is more appealing to make Knight of Autumn more of an appealing option. But then I do have a couple other green white cards in the stack here that I'm pretty excited for. So, and then I do have some more naturalized stuff in the green space. I actually really like the design of Heritage Reclamation. I picked up a couple of these for my modern sideboard back when Flage was still legal. Like there's some matchups where a naturalize played, and then they also had access to Flage. So that's the reason that this card is a thing there. And if you have Bazaar and you have Workshop, you have artifacts, you have graveyards, and then you also have access to the enchantment destruction here. But really nice modal card, going to be main deckable in this environment, and pretty significant against a number of the decks, I'm sure. And then it just being a one-time effect, I like that more. I'm not trying to like make a lot of really punishing interactive cards. I'm looking for more in the one-for-one space. Getting the draw card on the exiling card from a graveyard is kind of nice upside tier, but 2 mana is a lot to pay there, and the graveyard deck's going to have multiple things. So just like a pretty well designed and balanced card, even to the extent that Naturalize would be main deckable in this cube. I just like the design of Heritage Reclamation a lot more. I'm happier playing with this card. One that's a little bit more designed with modern sensibilities in mind is Wistfulness. This was a card that I saw. It's in a lot of like powered cubes these days. It's been in the digital powered cubes, and I picked up a copy because I was looking at it. Green's a little bit challenging in the 180 card powered cube space, and Wistfulness I think just kind of sucks in my powered cube. I don't think that having to pay that mana and getting these effects is just up to what the power level of that cube, definitely not at sorcery speed. And then I think in this cube, in a desert cube, having to get green, green, blue, blue, like casting this for 5, it seems likely you won't be able to get both modes. So you'll have to like really prioritize green and blue mana in the draft if you are going to get both modes. So that's something that makes the card a little bit more modest. I don't mind at all a green sorcery that exiles an artifact or an enchantment. The exiling is going to push back on stuff like Academy Ruins, which is great. I think that Academy Ruins is busted, so I don't mind having the exile effect there. And then the blue draw two discard a card. This is a card that just like plays with Living Death, which is a card that interested in having being like a functional build around in this cube. So having Wistfulness and like getting this back from the graveyard is nothing because Wistfulness only does anything when it enters when you actually pay the colored mana. So I think that this card, like, when it's strong, and it does have modern design sensibilities. It doesn't look like an old card at all. But I think on power level, this card plays more fair in context than it does. This is a strong card in constructed for sure, but I think in singleton or close to singleton cubes, and definitely in a desert cube where the mana is a little bit tougher, I think that this card is fine. And I could be wrong. You know, anything could be cut here. But another thing I also like for this design is with the desert, with the mana being harsh, hybrid mana and ways for the gold cards to generally make more decks, I think is pretty valuable. I'm generally just a fan of hybrid mana for finessing and making it so more cards are options for more players. I think that that makes draft to draft more dynamic because you have more options as long as the balance is reasonable and as long as your mechanics are not too parasitic. I think that hybrid mana and just stuff that's like easier to cast, gives players more agency. And then in a white, so now we're getting some white cards. I mentioned in the last video how I haven't really been talking about white cards. Is white is like the least fun color. It does the fewest things. I think I definitely have fewer total white cards in my stack. There's some I'm excited for. The white cards on the spread here are kind of boring, and I think that that's actually important to have some generically powerful stuff here, given that white barely plays with Bazaar of Baghdad. Like, there's going to be little reason to have white cards in your Bazaar of Baghdad deck, and a lot of the infrastructure for this cube is revolving around Dredge. As such, like, I gotta give you a reason to play white. Like, if you're not really touching some of the strongest things happening in the cube, and like, white can play with Mishra's workshop, but then I'm also doing some spell-based combo. I haven't gotten into great depths of that, but I'm going to be talking about the other cards that go in the Yawgmoth's bargain deck, and white also does not contribute much to spell-based combo. So a bunch of generic removal spells here, stuff in the Oblivion Ring space. Faith Fetter is a classic one. The life gain on here is also meaningful. Something I don't think I've alluded to at all is I'm going to have like kind of a burn, like a heavy amount of burn here. Like a burn deck is going to be one of the archetypes, at least as I have the cards laid out. And Face Fetter is meaningful as interaction for that deck. There's gonna be a little bit of that in today's video. You know, burn, of course, being interaction. Leyline Binding, I think, is pretty charming. When it comes to desert cubes, I actually really like Domain a lot as a mechanic because you really have to prioritize getting lands with types. It's a lot harder without a basic land box. So I like how this one plays here. It's also like variable in how valuable it is. If you're in white at all, then Oblivion Ring is a pretty solid rate for removal. The 4 mana ones play. And then Leyline Binding, for some people at the table, it costs 5. In a Desert Cube, it's possible this card even just costs 6. I do have a lot of not typed lands that are going to be going in here. And then it'll be cheaper for some other players too. 3, 2, or even 1 mana. So that variable value, I think, is pretty appealing. Rip Apart's pretty boring, but a lot of Boros cards are boring, and giving you a naturalize that can also answer a creature and something that's a little bit interactive for planeswalkers is something I'm going to value here. Certainly could see Rip Apart making it on the way out. This is not a very exciting card at all, but it does play, and you're going to want naturalizes in most of your decks in this environment, I think. Some bounce spells. Into the Royal, being able to buy you some time. Just a really classic card. A lot of nostalgia for Into the Royal. Otawara is a newer one. This card is pretty strong. I have Life from the Loam in the cube, so being able to rebuy Otawara is some pretty good interaction. And as far as needing to draft your lands, I like having some strong lands that give you like an anchor, a confident pick. Lands that happen to be spells. I actually think Otawara is a lot more modest than the Modern Horizons 3 Sink into Stupor. I think the Sink into Stupor is pretty broken because it just takes up a land slot in your deck. It can actually push back against a spell on the stack, which is not that strong if it's on a spell to do that, but because it's a land slot, you like get to do that if you draw too many lands. Whereas Otawara, I think that the rate here is much more modest. This one is another one that I could see just playing stronger than I perceive it to. I ended up not putting Beseiju in the stack here because that's one that I think can be pretty oppressive, definitely in conjunction with Life from the Loam, and that one having the drawback where your opponent can go find a land that becomes less of a thing in a desert cube because some of the decks aren't going to have type lands to search up. But Otawara, I think, is more modest. Some more generic white removal. I do know that Swords of Plowshares is a card that players draft very highly, even in powered cubes. I think it's just good to have some exiling removal. Again, it's good to give white some powerful things to do. In context, because some of the decks are going to be shy on basic lands, it's possible, there's going to be some of the games where Path to Exile is just a little bit stronger than Swords because your opponent won't have a basic land to get. Well, we'll see exactly how that shakes out. I still don't know how many basics are going to be in the cube, but it is something that's kind of funny to think about in the Desert Cube space. Swords is great, but I also do want cards that are good against Vengevine. I don't want the graveyard decks to just kind of be impossible or very difficult to interact with. And this is pretty long on generic white removal. I could definitely see cutting some number of this stuff as I get the list together, but Swords of Plowshares is always a fine placeholder. It's at least a card with a lot of history that even if it is very strong, like it doesn't outright win the game. And I don't know, I like casting it. I don't like a lot of white cards, but I like Swords to Plowshares, and there's some value in that. I don't have an extra Wrath of God, but I had an extra Day of Judgment. This is one where I have kind of a lot of sweepers on the list here. And I don't actually know how much I like that. um, we'll see if I want more sweepers, fewer sweepers, no sweepers. Because the creature decks, like, there's going to be a lot of modest stuff happening there, but then there is a lot of graveyard stuff happening, which is significant when it comes to overpowering an opponent casting a sweeper. But I think more significant, some of the sweepers I'm talking about today are a little bit more modest, some cool stuff that is very dated, which I guess, Day of Judgment is old, Wrath of God is from Alpha, but those cards still historically line up very well against aggressive decks. Where you'll see when I get to the weaker options in that category here, why there's a little bit of tension with the Day of Judgment. Parallax Wave is one that I had an extra copy of. This one, I have one in the pre-modern Tubert, and then I had another copy for powered environments, and this is definitely not strong enough for 180 card vintage cube. I'm not going to be doing anything like the Containment Priest interaction. This is going to be a lot more of a fair Parallax Wave, to the extent that this card can be fair. But, it's another old frame card, and I may or may not get into some interactions with it. Even just like blinking your own enter's ability is kind of significant. You can like wave and wave your own stuff to set up a sweeper. Like that's kind of cool in some games. It also just buys time against threats. Definitely if your opponent's cheating out large creatures, if they're only committing to one creature, which is a lot of the texture of those big artifacts that I have seeded for the Mishra's workshop deck, the Parallax Wave can buy some time there. So it's going to be an appealing card for sure. Snuff Out. This is another one that has some variable value given access to typed lands. Yeah, I have ABU duels here. There are the battle lands as well, so that gives you some swamps. There's going to be some basic swamps. but it is kind of fun to have to prioritize actually getting a swamp into your deck with this one. It is just a strong piece of removal, and then it's going to be weaker against red, so it has better and worse matchups as well. I just like this card pretty well. All right, so here's our weaker sweepers. Kagamaru, this is one that was really cool. Like when I was first getting into Cube, this card was in like every cube. And a lot of that is because this was before Damnation was printed. So when it came to playing with the Black Sweeper, you had to go to a more obscure is not the right word because everybody did know Kagamaru once upon a time, but more modest answers for sure. And I like the way that this card kind of plays differently. It's also kind of sick that Kagamaru into Yawgmoth's Bargain means you can like attack for lethal by drawing a bunch of cards, kind of like a build your own hatred. I think that that's sick. But this is a dope card. I'm pretty attached to having Kagamaru in this cube because it's the one that I think is just very cool and I have nostalgia for. And for that reason, I might end up trimming on some of these stronger sweepers in the cube to allow this one to be a little bit more prominent in the environment. And being a living, I don't know if I've talked about any morphs yet, but when it comes to a desert cube and having potentially rougher mana morphs, I think are pretty good to have around. Being a living just functions as a sweeper as well, so it's something you can pay it for 3 in any deck. It'll do some attacking. Morphs actually a pretty reasonable rate in the pre-modern Tubert when you're playing with a lot of old cards. 3 mana 2/2 is just like fine. That is just a card that we used to put in a lot of limited decks, believe it or not. And then having the sweeper effect here, having a range of different things to do with morph. And I have some other ones in this stack for sure. I want to have a decent selection of morphs, and this is one of the cooler ones. And another reason why I might move away from Day of Judgment, Wrath of God is to make Bane of Living stand out a little bit more. Infernal Grasp, this is funny. This is like a newly outmodded card. Like they printed this and then immediately made the 2 mana one. God, I'm blanking on the card's name. But it destroys a creature or planeswalker, and as an additional cost, you either lose 3 life or discard a card. And that card is just so much better than Infernal Grasp. Like sometimes discarding a card has value. That one hits planeswalkers. And so I had a bunch of these, and they were like all immediately cut from the cubes they made it into. This is just space where they immediately outclass this card. But in terms of removal, that has a little bit of cost to it. I do like that here, and it's kind of fun to feature this, like this being the aspect of leftovers where this card is in my collection because there was a very brief window where this was an appealing cube card, and now it's a little bit less desirable if you go too far back. If you're playing with the old frame or nostalgic environments, like this card's from 2021, so it's a little bit too new. But then even by playing more recent cards, this card was so quickly just completely outmodded, which is pretty funny. I like that history. And then Damnation, this card is so cool. Again, I am more attached to these more modest Black Sweepers, but I did have an extra Damnation. This I don't play sweepers in a lot of my queues because they're so strong against aggressive decks. And that's why I have a Damnation that I wasn't playing with. So I like the idea of playing with Damnation. I think that black is probably the color I have the most cards for in the stack. So Damnation might not make it by virtue of being too strong, but man, this planar chaos color shifted frame. This card is awesome piece of Magic's history. It's so cool. I think that I'm going to be more attached to Damnation, even though there's more about the cube infrastructure pushing against it than when it comes to Day of Judgment and Wrath of God. And then like Fire Covenant, this is such a weird old card. It's in the digital powered cubes now. It is a one-sided Plague Wind. There's going to be a lot in this cube. There's going to be stuff in the spell-based combo space. This card is not necessarily that strong against Dredge because they play out of the graveyard. It can play against some of the stuff in the heavy artifact decks, but not all. This is one I could see being too strong, but I am doing a number of things in the pay life space. Like one thing about having Necropotence, Yawgmoth's Bargain, Fire Covenant, Snuff Out, all in the same environment. It's difficult for one player to play all of that. And if you have all of that, you just don't have enough life to capitalize on all these effects. And there's going to be, at least the red aggressive deck that's going to make it hard to pay much life at all. So that's something that I am certainly mindful of. Life as a resource in this environment. Fire Covenant could easily come in too powerful, would not surprise me at all. But I have the Fire Covenant. I picked it up for high-powered cube environments. It doesn't play in the vintage Tubert, but so we're gonna give it a try here. I believe I tried this in the pre-modern Tubert, and if that's true, it came in way too strong because it's a 3-mana Plague Wind. But I think that there's more going on here. Definitely the presence of combo decks and the fact that there's matchups where this card doesn't really play, and then also matchups where the life cost is severe are a couple things that make it potentially more reasonable. Fire Ice, Banger, Jilt. This card's pretty strong against aggressive decks, but it's another old frame, cool card. May or may not stay in the cube. There's another, so I have 3 blue-red cards here. Like Fire Ice, classic, awesome. Prophetic Bolt, another classic, awesome card. I have another Izzet card, and I'm kind of thinking I might cap it at 3 cards for 2-color pair. Jilt would be the first one out with this spread. Like, Prop Bolt is just awesome, and also kind of opens you up a little bit more into the direct damage deck that does something other than attacking, like a little bit more of a counter burn deck potentially. Prop Bolt helps you support. And it's slightly different from a pure control deck because at some point these decks that are like card selection, counter spells, and burn do have to use the burn on the opponent, which is something going on with the blue red decks in the pre-modern Tubert. So I like Prof Bolt a lot. Like this one's going to stick around. Fire Ice is going to stick around. Fire Ice also has a little bit of that hybrid mana stuff going on. It's not hybrid, but you can play it in a blue deck with no access to red mana. Like, both modes are fine. Fire is more appealing than ice, but ice to cycle it is useful. So those two I am more attached to than Jilt, but Jilt is definitely one that limited, like invasion block, limited enjoyers, or for me, Popper Cube enthusiasts have certainly destroyed a lot of aggressive decks with. So that's why that one is potentially in here. Some classic burn decks, just like with Source of Plowshares, where we're playing the hits: Chain Lightning, Lightning Bolt, Fire Bolt. I just like playing these cards, so I have a lot of them. I have extras. I think that it's possible with the red cards I have laid out here that the red deck might be very strong in context, but I have Mishra's Workshop and Bazaar of Baghdad here, so that's fine. It's also something that lines up with my inherent bias. So often happens that I have to peel back on the red decks after my initial vision for a cube. I can see that happening here, but I'm certainly going to start with these ones. And like Chain Lightning, Lightning Bolt, I have a hard time imagining that I'll cut these ones in an environment where I'm allowing you to play Golgotha Forge Master on turn 2. Pyrokinesis, much like Fire Covenant, I'm less attached to. Only an answer to creatures, 0-mana answer to creatures. Like creatures attacking and blocking are presumably going to be one of the more fair things happening here. But this is a card I have at least a copy of every card in this cycle, and in fact, the other 4 are all in 30 to 50 Feral Hogs. That's Force of Will, Contagion, the lesser known Scars of the Veteran, and Bounty of the Hunt, which both play in that cube, and then Pyrokinesis, which definitely is too much for that environment, but shows up in the digital powered cubes. And this is one that I don't like for the pre-modern Tubert. Gonna give it a shot here because I have a copy. This old Alliances card is cool. Might be too hostile to stuff that does not deserve it, but I'm gonna give it a shot, at least looking at the list laid out. Zmiric Fiend, Duress, want to have some discard here for the combo busted stuff. This Mirror Fiend, definitely a classic. They have made stronger versions of this card many times, which explains why I have an extra Miss Mirror Fiend. Deep Cavern Bat, this is not. It does have those independent clauses. This Mirror Fiend has the separate enters and leaves effect, so if the creature leaves the battlefield before the initial look at the opponent's hand resolves, you do get to permanently exile a card, which I'll have some ways to capitalize on that in the cube. Duress is a card. I'm kind of a Duress hater. I am more sympathetic to Thoughtseize, certainly in modern Magic, than many, because the cards are so strong, and so like just taking one doesn't really matter in a lot of the games. And also, I think it sucks so much to play a discard effect and miss like that experience. Like I am more hesitant to put a duress in my deck than a lot of players, but a lot of the power in this cube is going to be in non-creatures, and having a duress for those combo decks, or maybe to take one of these sweepers if that's going to be an aspect of the cube. Like if you're playing a creature deck, having access to the duress to beat the sweepers could be significant. So I think this is a good environment for duress. I do have an extra Thoughtseize, but I think that something about that didn't feel quite right. That just kind of feels like really high power interaction, the kind of stuff that you would only have in like a very high powered cube, which there's some powerful stuff here, but something about Thoughtseize doesn't feel really leftover, where Duress does feel like leftovers, certainly at least according to my sensibilities. And the counterspell suite is definitely more leftovery. Condescend is a card that used to see some play in modern. Do people still play Blutron? Maybe. It's maybe as advisable as it's ever been. But having to pay into this, where this is not as strong as Mana Leak, like you have to actually pay more. Condescend does scale as the game progresses, and you do get that scrying, but it's a bit more modest in the counterspell space. I wanted some interaction, but not to have all of it, just be really clean and easy. And especially when you're playing with a lot of old cards, it's easy to even accidentally make blue the strongest color. And so I'm always mindful of that, and I'm trying to give something a little bit more modest in the blue space. Complicate's a cool one, where 3 mana counterspell, like a 3 mana Mana Leak, is certainly a reasonable rate. And then if you get this out when your opponent has to tap out, you can use the cycling ability, draw a card. It's really satisfying to get somebody that way. So this is a card that, gosh, I can't remember the last card this last time this card would have been relevant, but it's something that I remember was kind of always in the local peasant cubes. And it's one that I had a copy of, so I like the idea of putting that here. And I also just like don't have an extra mana leak. The card, my copies are just accounted for in various cubes. I do have an extra miscalculation, so that one's going to show up here. And I like the cycling aspect in the Desert Cube as well. I think mostly this is just a strong card that you're going to put in a blue deck, but a little bit of cycling to finesse the Desert Cube restriction is welcome. Remand, a card that does not get played anywhere near the amount that it used to. Like this, just a 4 of in standard and modern for a very significant amount of time. Doesn't show up too much anymore. I think that just being able to cast your spell again, Remand, is generally pretty inoffensive to the extent that it can be frustrating. It's frustrating against generally decks that are casting a game ender. Like you're spending 5, 6 mana for a spell. It's pretty punishing to be remanded, especially if the remand player has some battlefield presence. But also, what you're casting is probably trying to win the game. So this card is not weak, but having kind of like some not permanent answers, like some blue stuff in the bounce space versus giving you a bunch of like counterspell and exclude and cryptic command where you generate actual card advantage and also just like keep your opponent off the table. I think Remand's a lot more modest. Absorb, speaking of modest, speaking of life gain, checks those boxes. Old frame card, sweet one, had a copy, you want to play it. Negate, just like Duress, I don't really cube with Negate. Totally reasonable card that makes sense to play in a lot of environments. It's more of a sideboard card for me, but I think that Desert should be a little bit scrappy. Not like super scrappy. I have Lightning Bolt, I have Swords to Plowshares. But negate over counterspell. I like that the card doesn't always hit everything. And I also like that it's just a little bit easier to cast. Like the one blue pip is meaningful there. Pact Negation is one that I don't know if is going to make the final list. This card is way better at protecting a combo than it is countering your opponent when they're doing something strong. This card enables you to tap out, but then the cost of paying 5 for a counterspell is so steep. Like you need to pay that 5 later. I have this Pact Negation. It hasn't found a permanent home in any of my cubes because it generally is only supporting players doing something pretty degenerate. I do think a lot of the power allocation in my vision for this cube does make things more modest, which makes it more reasonable that you'll play this in a deck that's just looking to tap out in a fair way. We'll see. I do think that also there's like a decent amount of interaction for the combo decks that make it so that maybe I'm sympathetic to Pact Negation. I think it's just a really cool card. Also, just like the pack cycle, a piece of Magic's history. I think it's also rad to like have Pact Negation with Platinum Angel, which is one of the big Mishra's Workshop hits that I have in the cube. So I like that interaction a lot. I don't know if that'll ever come up, but it is cool to me. All right, some graveyard hate. I definitely want to have some graveyard hate. I want you to be able to do graveyard things, but I want some graveyard hate that's like modest, like you pay for what you get. Like you have to commit to hating the graveyard, but I don't want the graveyard zone to just be totally uninteractable because of course Mishra's work or Bazaar of Baghdad rather, whatever you're doing, you get such cheap access to it that some interaction does become important, even if I do want to encourage people to dredge. I want to have some answers. So Loaming Shaman, like paying 3 mana for this kind of effect at sorcery speed. You're paying for what you get. Another spot where the green creature, I mean, I'll just say it, like Green Sun's Zenith is going to be in the cube. So having a tutorable graveyard interaction piece there is meaningful. Scrabbling Claws, it's, not as backbreaking as Relic of Progenitus, but you can get at least one specific card from it. Can also push back against somebody more slowly filling the graveyard. Just like a reasonable card to play. The Izumi Grave Robber is another classic. The Kamigawa flip mechanic. I would believe a lot of players don't know how this works. But this is transformed before they invented two-sided cards. You just flip it over. So this is one that first tries to empty a player's graveyard at a pretty bad rate. 2 per card is a lot, but it will do the job if you need to empty out a graveyard. And then you get like a walking zombify if you can successfully empty a graveyard. So Nuzumi Grave Robber, like in terms of cube historically, this is really strong on turn 2 because often with just one activation you can flip it. And then you got your 2 mana 4/2 that can start recurring stuff later. Granted, 4/2 doesn't get into combat with a lot of things very effectively, but this card is very cool. I think it's going to play here. Another Final Fantasy Commander deck card, Scavenger Grounds, reprint from Hour of Devastation, somewhere in Amonkhet. Having a land you can sacrifice to exile graveyards, it's funny because it plays with Life from the Loam, but not really. It's a desert. I love that. I'm definitely going to have some actual deserts. That's pretty cool for a desert cube. And I think this is a cost that is steep enough to pay to hate on graveyards that I like the idea of trying the Scavenger Grounds. This was only on my radar because I looked through my stack of Final Fantasy Commander cards. I don't think I would have gotten out of my way to get a copy otherwise, but because I had it, it checks the leftovers boxes, plays with the desert theme. Love that. And then Lion Sash, I think, is pretty strong. Like, I'm not going to do Scavenging Ooze. I think that that card is so strong against Graveyard and pushes back so aggressively that makes it really tough to do a lot of Graveyard stuff. Definitely, if I'm pushing to have like 4 mana Zombify, Scavenging Ooze just houses that. Whereas Lion Sash is the same rate, but it dies to all the artifact destruction. So there's a ton of cards that destroy Lion Sash. I think that this is strong graveyard hate, but is a way more interactable, which makes it a better fit. Just kind of how I'm lining everything up. This card just makes more sense to me. And I can still see it coming in strong, but that's the argument there. It dies to the orangutan, and the graveyard decks are going to be some of the decks that are playing that. Stonecloaker is another very modest piece of graveyard hate. And then this can also rebuy any Enter's ability. So this is like a 3 mana 3/2 flash flying. It's like fine. There's going to be some equipment in the cube, so a flyer to take advantage of that is meaningful. Rebuying your Enter's effects is meaningful. You're paying for what you get here, but then you also get to exile a card. This can be just like a hard counter for the Dread Return, for the Unburial Rites. And yeah, it's kind of a steep cost, but it's a cool card, and there's like things you can kind of build your deck around doing with this card. So I'm a big fan of Stonecloaker. It has not been strong enough to show up anywhere for a long time. We're going to give it a chance here. And then I do want to have some land destruction. You know, Mishra's Workshop, Bazaar of Baghdad, they're really strong. I don't want to just give you Wasteland because there's a lot of weak lands here too. And then the Ghost Quarter, this is funny. So I have a Russian copy of Ghost Quarter, a Russian Dissension Ghost Quarter that I personally opened up in a booster pack in like 2009, maybe. I can tell you the store I bought it at, and I've just had it in my collection. It just looks really cool, and it's something that Jane has in the ball pit. I don't remember what language it is, but she has a foil non-English slow bad, and something that she said is like, part of it is like a reminder that not everybody that plays Magic is a native English speaker, and that's just like kind of cool. And I definitely acquired more non-English cards when I was first getting competitive, partly because a lot of times you get to get them cheaper than English cards, but it did get kind of frustrating in tournaments playing against people that didn't know what all the cards did, and it just like was always kind of awkward to because like you end up calling a judge and like say what it is. It's kind of annoying. I'm gonna have like a post-it note or something that says what the English text on this card is for anybody that doesn't know it. But that's kind of what's going on there. Like I literally have had this Russian Ghost Quarter for 15 plus years, and I don't even know when the last time I would have played it with. Like literally, if I even ever played it, but it's been with me for a long time. And then this is non-basic land destruction that has a drawback. Your opponent can go find a basic, but also it's a desert cube, so they might not have a basic to get. And then I have like the Crucible, the Ramyat Excavator, the Life from the Loam. So you could run your opponent out even if they have one or multiple basics, which is something that kind of plays a little bit in that wasteland space, but it's more charming. You have to work for it more, or there's a little bit more variance in it, where some of your opponents will be like better positioned against it than others. So I think that that is something that plays a lot better than outright non-basic land hate, which is just like super punishing for things like the bounce lands. And then this is one that I picked up a copy. The Resleevables recently did their look at Odyssey block, and so in Torment they were talking about Petrovark. This card is not priced to move. I had it in my head, looking over cards. Avalanche Riders is a card that I've cast a lot. It's a really good non-basic land hate card. Like Avalanche Riders is really going to punish somebody playing a bounce land, like a 4 mana land destruction spell. It's really punishing against those lands. You're paying a lot if this is an answer to Bazaar or Mishra's Workshop. And then the Petrovark has the downside where if your opponent can answer it, then they're just going to get their land back. Even with that, the Petrovark's still kind of good against bounce lands because they'll have to bounce into their land. And they were just talking about this card in the context of being one that showed up in your limited decks. Even then, lamenting like Menace would go a long way on this card. This card really does not get into combat in a meaningful way. It's another one with those separate clauses where if you can get rid of like sacrifice the Petrovark before the Enter's ability resolves, then you can just make it so you permanently exile a land. I want to have some interaction for those really powerful lands, and this checks the boxes. You're paying a lot for it. This card might just suck. This might not stick around, but it's an old frame card. And I think that like the Ghost Quarter fits here in a way that's really cool and you can kind of build around. And the Petrovark more like explicitly kind of sucks, but in a way that I'm really drawn to. I don't know. I mean, let me know in the comments what your experience with Petrovark is. Let me know if you would ever put this card in your deck. I can conceive of playing this. And, if you have some strong equipments like a Sword of Fire and Ice, like a Petrovark will pick that up. I don't know. It definitely It, it might not be strong enough here or anywhere, but this is the kind of card I'm looking at. I'm like pretty firm that Avalanche Riders is too much. I don't want to do like Molten Rain, but Petrovark is kind of like in the explicit land destruction space, and it is just like a creature, so you can't just put it in your deck. So that's kind of what I'm looking at there in terms of interacting with non-basic lands. But yeah, a lot of interactions for creatures, some stuff for graveyards, counter spells and discard spells, a lot of clean answers to creatures. And looking at it all together like this is 50 total cards. It feels like a lot to go and say, I got Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, Swords of Plowshares, Path to Exile. In aggregate, though, like this is just kind of a couple things for everybody. If this is just like one deck, it might be very frustrating to try to draft a creature deck in this environment, but we'll see how it all shakes out when we get the full list together. But that's going to do it for this look at interaction spells. Probably going to talk about spell-based combo next time. So thanks for joining me again. If you like what you see, of course, I would appreciate you liking, commenting, subscribing, all that jazz. If you want to support me on Patreon, I'm on Patreon, patreon.com/180MTG. 180MTG is my weekly Cube podcast. Check that out if you're not listening. But anyway, that's it for me for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back next time talking more Cube. Later, gamers.